Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this week's Rosh Christi live stream. We are glad that you could join us, and we appreciate that you've joined us amidst all the other possible things that you could be doing at this time. We hope you will find tonight's session valuable and of encouragement. For those of you who are new to our audience, let me just take a brief minute to introduce Rosh Christi to you. We are a student campus ministry, international student campus ministry, and we focus on Christianity in the intellectual sphere. How do we defend the Christian faith, and how do we interact with the ideas of the day, specifically on campus? Now, currently, with most campuses closed, we have resorted to the internet here, which has actually afforded us some wonderful opportunities to spend some time with various experts in the field from all over the world, really, here on our own shores and then abroad as well. So this is a unique opportunity for us, and we're trying to make the best of the times. We hope that you will enjoy tonight's discussion. Please go and have a look at our website if you're interested in our work on campus specifically. We also have some resources on there, articles by various different authors on different topics. We have recommended reading lists and some free ebooks that you can avail yourself of on the website there. If you find the work that we're doing of interest and of benefit to you, and you would like to support us as a non-profit organization, please click on the link below and follow it to make a donation. Right, so that for introduction as far as the ministry is concerned. Tonight, it is my privilege and really just a special treat to welcome our friend and fellow seminarian, Marcia Montenegro, on this live stream with us tonight. I'm not going to say too much by way of introduction. I'll let Marcia tell her story. Suffice it to say, she is a special instrument in the hand of God. She has a very unique ministry, and she is somebody that we see as an authority in this area. And we're very grateful that we were fortunate enough to cross her path, because we have sent many a question her way. So tonight, please feel free to pose your questions while you have this opportunity to interact with Marcia. You are welcome to post them in the live chat box, and they will be conveyed to us. So welcome, Marcia, and thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Thank you so much, Nell, for giving me this opportunity and having me on. It's nice to see you again after not seeing you for several years.
Yes, it feels like the good old times.
Yes.
So we'll jump right in, and would you be kind enough to please just share your story with us? Tell us a little bit about what God has done in your life, and share your testimony with us, and also a little bit on your current ministry, how He is using your life and your history. We'd really appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes. I was raised in different countries because my father was in the Foreign Service. He was an agnostic, wasn't sure there was a God, didn't think we could really know there was a God. My mother was raised as a Christian, but did not really talk about her faith, or didn't read the Bible as far as I know. But my sister and I were made to go to church because my mother thought that was a good thing. So I had experiences of going to different churches. And when we came back to the United States, I was a teenager and I got involved in a church. But I never understood really, I didn't understand why Jesus died on the cross. I would hear this in the sermons. The Sunday school didn't really talk about it that I recall. And I didn't really understand it. I had friends in high school who were from different religious beliefs, non-Christian beliefs. And I began to think, why do I have to call myself a Christian? Why can't I make a decision about what I want to believe? And I was at that point already rejecting the idea of the Bible as being a book that had any real value for me. I was rejecting the idea of hell. I basically just kind of wanted to leave Christianity and explore other religions. And so when I got to college, I was introduced to Eastern religions, in some courses and an independent study project I did on Gandhi, I got very interested in Hinduism. Now, at the same time, I had an interest in the paranormal, which started in high school. It started with interest in astrology and psychic abilities. And so that area was another interest. It was sort of a parallel interest to the Eastern religion interest. And those were like two tracks that drew me. And I did some reading, and some things happened in college. But after I got out and graduated, I had more time to explore. I did more reading, got very interested in contact with the dead. I read a lot of books on that, and interest in Hinduism, and all areas of the paranormal. So that led eventually, after a few years, to where I really wanted to be serious about it. I really wanted to study something in depth. And I had one course that was, it was called Inner Light Consciousness. And this was kind of a landmark event in my life, because in this particular course, which was actually hosted by Quaker House in Atlanta, Georgia, I was introduced to many ideas that we would now call maybe New Age. So we were introduced to healing, like psychic healing and healing remotely. We were introduced to a guided meditation, and the teacher would have us go through these steps where you basically relax, and then he would tell us what to visualize. He would tell us more or less what to visualize, and then we could customize it to what we wanted. So he might say, visualize a peaceful place, and whatever it may be, and then you visualize a garden or the ocean or whatever. But we went through this every evening, this guided visualization. And at the last evening, he said, tonight you will encounter your spiritual master when we do the meditation. And that spiritual master will be with you for the rest of your life. And so, and you can contact the spiritual master through the meditation, but eventually you won't need the meditation. So we went through our meditation, and then at the end, he added on something extra we hadn't done before. And this was an encounter. It was certain steps that I won't go into, but it was an encounter with this spiritual master. And of course, each of us are meeting our own spiritual master. So we're not meeting the same, master. I want to say person, but this was a disembodied entity. This was not a person of flesh and blood. And we all realized that. So during this, I did encounter somebody. And I was very excited about my spiritual master. I thought he looked wise, and I thought he looked kind and compassionate. I didn't talk to him, I just saw him. And when it was over, some of us discussed what had happened. And then after that, I actually felt this kind of change in me, where I felt I had kind of accelerated in my spiritual growth. And I got involved with a Tibetan Buddhist group for a brief time. I learned Tibetan Buddhist meditation and some of the teachings, and I was reading books and taking all that in. So that happened also. So at this point, I'm getting I'm not deep in it, but I'm really beginning to formulate my spiritual path, which seemed to me like a really great thing, because I was very free in my choices of what to go, where to go, what teacher to listen to, what book to read. Nobody was telling me what to do. The Tibetan Buddhist group wanted me to come to their private teachings, and I resisted that because I felt if I did that, I would be caught up with that group and I wouldn't have my freedom, which is probably true. So I resisted that, and I actually left them. And eventually I got into Zen Buddhism over a period of time and did a lot of reading and went to Zen Buddhist meditation places. And at the same time, my interest in astrology had never gone away. And there was a place all of this was taking place in Atlanta, Georgia, by the way. There was a place in Atlanta, Georgia that taught things like psychic development, past life regression, tarot cards, astrology. And I went there and I took psychic development and astrology classes. And I really flourished in those classes. I loved them. I felt like things were happening to me, spiritually speaking. So this led me into it much deeper. I began reading more books. The astrology eventually led to me actually taking a 7-hour exam in order to be certified and purchase a business license so I could operate legally as an astrologer in the city limits. So I did that, and I was also still doing my Eastern meditation. By now it's more of Zen Buddhist meditation and some other types. All of these things were giving me experiences that I felt were spiritual. And I felt these spiritual experiences validated my beliefs. And this is really how it works. You start believing something, you have an experience with it, and the experience validates your belief. And that happens, it's very common in the New Age, which is what I was in, even though astrology is an occult practice. And I know we're going to get to the occult, but a lot of New Agers do occult practices. So I started, doing astrology, and I had clients. I got very deeply involved. The exam that's given for astrology in Atlanta, or at least it used to be, I don't know if it's still happening, was given at City Hall, but the test itself is formulated by people on the Astrology Board of Examiners. And I was on that board for 4 years, and I was chairperson for the last 3 years. And we were giving the exams and grading them. Only half the people who took it every year would pass. It was a very difficult exam. And I also became president of the Astrological Society. So at this point, I'm really 100% into these beliefs. I had a belief in God as an energy that we all come from and all go back to. For many years, I had believed in reincarnation, even before I became an astrologer. So I believed in that when we die, we go somewhere, then we come back as another person, and that goes on and on and on for centuries, maybe thousands of years. And you're learning your lessons each time and advancing spiritually, supposedly. So I was very, very a big believer in that. I had taken some past life regression workshops where I, quote unquote, remembered past lives. And so I was into that. I had tarot cards. I kind of taught myself how to read them. I never used them on anybody, but I was interested in them. I'd taken a class in numerology. I'd taken a class in palm reading. So I kind of dabbled in different areas, but I focused on astrology. Astrology to me explained everything. It explained the world. It explained why you're here. It explained what your lessons are, what your purpose is, what your negative qualities are, what your positive qualities are. I felt it just explained everything. So I really loved astrology. And I taught astrology. I was also a teacher at the Astrological Society in Atlanta. So I became a teacher. And at the same time, I was still doing my Zen Buddhist meditation, which actually is called mindfulness. And I felt that I was advancing very spiritually. And of course, most of my friends were involved in these kind of beliefs. And I had totally, at this point, of course, wanted nothing to do with Christianity. I saw Christians as being on a lower level of spiritual evolution. And they were kind of they were on their path, but it was very limited, and they were limited to one book, the Bible, and they were limited to maybe a few Christian teachers who told them what was true and what wasn't true. And that was my view of Christianity. So I wanted nothing to do with it. So it was very surprising and this actually started when I was still president of the Astrological Society. I started getting this very, very strange compulsion to go to a church. And I didn't know where this was coming from because I didn't want to go to a church. But I kept feeling like I should go. And it just wouldn't leave me alone. I mean, it started like around April, and then it kept on and kept on. In August, I went to an astrological conference in Oregon where I spoke. I came back to Atlanta and it was still there. So I decided that I would go to a church because I thought this must be something from a previous life. There's some kind of unfinished business that has to do with a church or Christianity that I need to get out of my system, or I need to confront it. So I went to a very large church in downtown Atlanta, and I sat in the back because my plan was to leave after about 20 minutes. That was my plan. Which is really funny now when I think about what happened, because the service began, they played music, everyone stood up, and a procession came from the back of a young boy carrying a cross, followed by, I think, the choir and the ministers. And as he walked by me, this very strange thing happened. I felt this love, I call it a waterfall of love, falling on me. And it was very, very real. And I knew it had nothing to do with the music or even with the church. It didn't really have anything to do with the people in the church. And it wasn't just like a feeling, it was like a real experience. It's the only way I know to put it. And I knew it was coming from God, and that God was telling me that he loved me. And this really took me by complete surprise. I didn't know how to process that. And I was crying. Tears were coming out of my eyes. And I guess I was in shock. And I ended up, staying for the whole service. And I went home and wrote in my journal about it. And I said, I don't really know what this means, but I am not going to leave my spiritual path. So I think I had I had an inkling that maybe this was something that might take me away from what I already believed. I don't think I really consciously understood it, but I maybe had a kind of inkling about it, or a hunch. And I thought, but I'm going to stay on my spiritual path. And so I went back to the church because I didn't expect that to happen again, but I just wanted to go back. And I ended up actually getting into a class there where I would raise my hand and talk about Tibetan Buddhism. And everybody would look at me very politely and smile. So nobody gave me any pushback. This was a very open-minded church. It was an Episcopal church. And I was also in a group that was meeting, and God just began, of course, at the time I didn't know this, but God began to work on me. I started getting this impression that God did not like astrology. Now, no one at the church told me that. I was, and not most people there didn't know I was an astrologer. I told a few people who were okay with it. So but I had this impression God didn't like astrology, and that quickly became an impression that he wanted me to give it up. And when I got that impression, I was very upset because I was thinking, but I actually help people with astrology. All my clients always told me how helpful my astrology reading was. And so I couldn't understand, why would God be against that? And so I went and talked to the rector of the parish, and I told him about it. And he took out the Bible, and he was reading from the Old Testament these passages about people doing divination. And he said they used to read the liver of animals. And I was sitting there thinking, why is he telling me this? I wasn't really making the connection at first, but then it kind of sunk in. And I thought, well, this is confirmation that God does want me to stop. And I decided I would have to stop. Now, I still didn't understand why or what was going on. And I actually had to tell my clients who called me I couldn't do, because I had returning clients. I didn't just do someone's chart one time. They usually came back. And I said, I can't do this anymore. Or new clients would call me, and I would give them the names of other astrologers. So I thought, okay, now if I'm not doing astrology, I am going to just start reading the Bible. You know, maybe that's what I should do. So I started with Matthew chapter 1, verse 1, and I started reading a little bit every night. At this point, I'm still going to the church. Also, I had been, around this time, I was hired by one of my clients because my marriage had ended. He knew I needed money because astrology wasn't enough to support me and my son. I had a son. And so he offered me this very well-paying part-time job where he worked. But what he wanted me to do was give him astrological advice on the people there. I'm sorry, actually, that had happened. I'm sorry, that happened the previous December. I forgot to put that in there. So that happened before I got this compulsion to go to church. So I should have put that in first. So I'm at this place where I'm actually kind of doing astrology. And now I'm giving it up. So the way things worked out, though, my boss was on this leave and he wasn't in the office. So he wasn't there for me to go tell him, look, I can't do astrology anymore. And he had just left me with some busy work. And I was doing busy work. And while he was gone, this was in December when I was reading Matthew. Right before Christmas, I got to Matthew chapter 8, and I was reading the passage about Jesus on the boat with the disciples, and the storm comes, and the disciples think they're going to drown, and they wake Jesus up. It's in Matthew 8, and I think it's in Mark 4. I think it's in Luke 8 too. I'm not sure, but I was reading Matthew chapter 8. And Jesus says, well, he rebukes the sea and the wind, and the storm stops. And Jesus says to the disciples, you of little faith. You know, basically, he's saying, you still don't understand who I am. And this account just grabbed me. I don't know. There was something about it that just grabbed me. And I kept rereading it. And as I was rereading it, God just opened my eyes and I saw who Jesus was. I really understood. You know, I had heard he was a savior. I had heard he was the Son of God, but I never believed it and I never understood what it meant. And now all of a sudden I understood what it meant. I understood why he'd gone to the cross. I understood I was separated from God and I needed to be reconciled. And I realized I had been on a wrong spiritual path my whole life and that I had been going against God. And it just, all of this, I realized in, you know, I don't know, maybe a few seconds, I'm not sure. And so immediately I just turned my life over to Christ. I don't think I said anything. I think I just did it. It was an act of will. And I knew as soon as I did that, I knew I was a different person. It was a very vivid experience. It was very real. And so then I didn't know what to do after that. I realized I was a Christian. And I thought, this is really strange because I never liked Christianity and now I'm a Christian. It was sort of a funny position to be in. And it was a very strange time. I didn't have anybody really to talk to. And because the people at the church, by and large, were not very understanding. I didn't really recount this experience, but I did tell them I had given astrology up. And the people that I said this to said, why? Mm-hmm. You know, like, why did you give it up? And it was hard for me to explain that, but I said, well, somehow it was separating me from God. And also when my clients called and said I'd given it up, but at this point I had become a Christian. When I actually gave it up, I wasn't a Christian. So all I knew is that it was separating me from God. Now I realized it was wrong, although I still didn't understand why completely. And so that led me from there to telling my boss when he came back that I could no longer do this astrology business. And he was very nice. And he said, that's okay. Well, then he said, you can use your psychic abilities. And I said, no, I can't do that either. And so I wasn't a psychic, but when you do astrology, you develop psychic abilities that occur when you're doing the astrology readings. So he was nice and he let me stay there. And in that office, there was a young man who had befriended me. he knew I was an astrologer, and I knew he was a Christian. And he would often ask me questions about things like, what do you think about today's music? Or what do you think about this movie? Or what do you, he would just kind of ask me these questions, and then I would give him answers. He was very nice. Well, after I became a Christian, I went and told him I had become a Christian. And he like nodded his head. I can't even remember what he said at that point. But a few months later, he came into my office and I said, it's very strange to me that I was an astrologer a few months ago and now I'm a Christian. And he said, maybe somebody was praying for you. And I said, oh no. I said, I don't, I said, nobody would pray for me. I don't know anybody who would pray for me. And he was kind of smiling. And I said, oh, wait a minute. I said, were you praying for me, Jeff? And he said, well, he said, my young adult group was praying for you all last year. So they had been praying for me that whole year when I got the compulsion to go to the church and all those things happened. They were faithfully praying for me every other Tuesday night when they met. And that really just blew me away, really. It was like, wow, So, of course, I had to disengage from the Astrological Society. There were a lot of things that happened. My chiropractor was a witch. I actually, when I went to see the rector of the parish and he was reading those Old Testament passages to me, the night I decided to give astrology up, the next day was Thanksgiving. And my chiropractor had invited me to her home for Thanksgiving. Everyone there was a witch except me. Now, I had been in that situation before because she was one of my most valuable clients. She gave my card to everybody. I got a lot of business from her. So I'm going to her house on Thanksgiving Day. Now, this is before I'm a Christian, but I've given astrology up. And I go in there and I say right away, I'm not going to talk about astrology. I said, I'm sort of taking a break from it. I didn't tell her I'd given it up. And she was like, what, why? And I said, I'm just taking a break, so I don't want to talk about it. And she said, okay, all right, we won't talk about it. So there was a strange incident that happened there, but I won't go into that. There's so many things that happened during this time. So eventually, of course, the Lord, I left Atlanta and came up to the Washington, D.C. area. Eventually, after going to many churches, found a good church. And I started, learning the Bible. I also eventually felt called to ministry. I didn't really know. I had encouragement from the missions pastor and other people because I didn't really want at first to do anything like that. And people were saying to me, Marcia, why don't you do this ministry full time? Because I was doing it part time and working full time in an office. But it eventually led me to actually become a missionary and to have my ministry supported by various churches and people. But that takes a while to do. But all of those steps were taken. And so my ministry is Christian Answers for the New Age. And it has two purposes. One is to reach out to people in the New Age and the occult and share the truth of Christ with them. And the other is to educate Christians on the New Age and the occult, because a lot of these things come into the church. And the New Age in particular is very subtle. And so a lot of people don't recognize it. And so I have a lot of articles on my website. I've done a lot of talks in various places and a lot of interviews like this and podcasts. So, and I've written, I have actually 2 books now, and I've written a lot of published articles and chapters in various books. So I had quite a lot of exposure to different things on that journey and I was in it for a long time, for a good 20 years. And it was definitely the main part of my life, aside from my son, after my son being born. Aside from him being the most important thing, were all these other things. So that's a story, I think. Well, leaving a lot out.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I've got some questions rolling in here already, but before we continue, I wanted to ask you maybe just for for our audience, you mentioned a couple of terms in there, and I would appreciate it if you could maybe give some definitions and make some distinctions for us.
Okay.
You mentioned the paranormal, and then the occult, and then New Age. So, and you say they're all, intertwined somewhat, but you would distinguish between them. Would you mind just sort of separating those out for us?
Sure. I think the paranormal is kind of a term that it refers to something supernatural that's beyond the natural.
Mm-hmm.
So the paranormal would refer to maybe using your mind to see something miles away, or as a psychic maybe, or contact with the dead. Now, the thing is, it gets real tricky here because a lot of people who do these things consider these natural abilities. Like some psychics will say, but your ability to be a psychic is a natural ability. You just have to learn how to uncover it and use it. But actually, the operation of it is supernatural because it's not based on data. It's not based on the five senses. So I would say the paranormal is information that is obtained beyond the five senses. And that's how I would describe it. And you can have experiences with that, or you can get information that way. And of course, this is all part of the occult and the New Age. So the paranormal would fit under both categories. The New Age and the occult, even though they overlap a lot, I make distinctions in their worldviews. Actually, the occult is a set of practices that is tied into various worldviews. So the set of practices of the occult are spirit contact, divination, and sorcery. And spirit contact is kind of self-explanatory, contacting the disembodied spirit, and that would include contacting what you think are the dead. Then there is divination, which is often called fortune telling. And that includes a big area. That's astrology, tarot cards, palm reading, tea leaf reading, using a pendulum. Mm-hmm. I would even put, psychic readings under there. That covers a huge, huge field. The I Ching. Then you have sorcery, which is what some people would just call magic, but not stage magic, like occult magic, which is channeling, manipulating, or in some way using a supernatural force, or using what you think are various spirits or gods, calling on them to help you to do something that cannot be done in the real world through normal channels. So you're trying to bring something into reality that does not exist. You're trying to manifest something in different ways. And that's also a kind of big, complicated area, but that's how I would more or less describe it. So, and it would even include healing. So it would include energy healing, because in most cases, the person believes they're channeling some kind of energy for healing or calling up an energy. So summoning spirits or forces is usually part of sorcery. So those are the three areas of the occult that are covered in Deuteronomy 18, 10, and 11. And then the New Age, people who do the occult and focus on the occult tend to be more focused on the here and now, how they can use their abilities to bring about certain results. And it's more like almost like a craft-oriented kind of mindset. Although there are spiritual views there, I find that those tend not to be the main thing, depending on the person. But the New Age as a category is very oriented towards spirituality, and it's very future-oriented in contrast to the occult, because the New Age is based on the idea we're all spiritually evolving. And we're all on this path. And so you need to discover, first of all, that you are on a spiritual path and that you are evolving, usually through many lives. And the spirituality of it is very focused on, there's almost a spirit matter duality. So things that are spiritual have a higher vibration, whereas matter has a lower vibration. So being in a body is really a hindrance. And the idea is that you're really a spiritual being, which means you actually don't have a material body. So there are a lot of teachings around that focus on that focus on a spiritual advancement through raising your vibration, whether it's through diet or meditation or certain teachings. And it's this future oriented thing, looking towards this kind of, this evolving, you're evolving towards this point. And that is really much more new age than the occult. That's what you see in the now there are people in the occult who may have new age ideas, and a lot of people in the new age do occult practices, like me. Like I was a new ager, but I was doing astrology, which is an occult practice. But I wouldn't have called myself an occultist. I didn't have the occultist worldview. I had a little bit of it, but I was much more focused on the new age spirituality. And all, religions eventually will lead to the same point.
Mm-hmm.
So those are some differences. So there are differences, even though they overlap.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned, I'm going to jump in here with my questions while I can.
Okay.
I'm conscious of these ones pouring in here, but I do have one or two just sort of after reading your book. Also, I read Spellbound, since I have young children who will probably at one stage ask some questions. For those of you who are watching, this is Marcia's book, Spellbound, the paranormal seduction of today's kids. And it certainly answered some of my questions and gave some very practical advice as far as how to have these discussions with children. One of the things that I noticed there that you said is as far as experiences. So when somebody says, well, I have these very real and vivid experiences. Why am I not to trust these? Why not base my beliefs and my confirmation on this? I thought your comments in the book on that was interesting. Would you mind sharing that with us?
Yes, I don't remember what I wrote in the book. So I may say something else, I'm not sure. But I think this is how I answer that, is that your experiences are subjective. They're very much something you're experiencing. You can't really validate it except to say, I experienced it. And so in order to trust that, there should be something outside of that to support it. There should be something objective, some objective data to support it. Because we are very, very good at deceiving ourselves. Very, very good at even initiating things in our own mind that could lead to an experience. Or if you believe something strongly enough, you actually can have an experience from that. And this is done all the time in the New Age and the occult. They actually do things that will initiate an experience. Of course, they think it's real, that it's a good thing what they're doing. But, I came to see after I got out of it that these are all really, they're deceptions. You might have an experience, but that doesn't mean the experience is a good thing. And it doesn't validate the belief that you think it validates. So I think my main thing is that it's very subjective, and just it's almost like saying, you had a dream, so that dream must be true because I dreamed it. It's just a subjective experience. I don't remember what I said in the book. That's how I answer it.
No, that's definitely right. Well, let me play the skeptic then here for a second and say,
Okay.
Well, Marcia, what about the experience that you had in church that day, that experience of God's overwhelming love and sort of the waterfall experience as you described it? What grounds that, and what makes you so certain that was real and that was not maybe just a subconscious need that you had?
Right. Now that's a good question. And of course, initially I didn't know what it was or how true it was. It seemed very true to me, but I didn't know that. I think the way I answer that, because a lot of people who do become Christians sometimes do have experiences unusual like that. Not always, but some. The thing is where did it lead me? It led me eventually to completely giving up my former beliefs. It led me to, which I didn't want to do. It led me to believing in Jesus Christ, whom I had not believed in. It led me to a whole different worldview. And so I would say that, yeah, that was a subjective experience, but it was validated by my actions later. because I actually gave all of that up. If I hadn't given that up and had continued doing astrology maybe, and yet claimed to be a Christian, then I would question the validity of that experience for sure. But it was a very clear opposition to what I was believing and living, and had been believing for many, many, many years, not just briefly. So I think that shows something real happened. Whether somebody thinks that's good or not is another issue, but something definitely happened there.
And then I noticed in your book also, interesting the comments that you make on morality and the issue of good and evil. Now, there's quite a bit to say about that, and it comes up specifically when you talk about magic and the white and the black magic, and that some of these things are sometimes seen as good. Would you comment a little bit on the problem as far as the moral and good and evil within occultic and even the New Age practices?
Yes, I'd like to, because in the New Age in particular, there's no absolutes. So there's no absolute truth. There's no absolute good and evil. In fact, evil is usually a word you don't hear in the New Age at all. You hear positive and negative, or something along those lines. You don't hear a moral condemnation of anything. It's very subjective. So what feels true to you and what feels right to you is usually, that's acceptable. In the occult, they don't really have absolute good and evil either, but they often will talk about light and dark. And the view of it can vary, but there can be a view where they see something like dark spirits are I don't know if they would use the word evil, but dark spirits are bad, or dark spirits can harm you. And they will accept something like that, although they don't believe in some absolute. Keep yourself in check, because it will deepen your practice into what would be seen as the dark side. And so you do have a lot of people, though, particularly in Wicca and witchcraft, who will say, I only use my magic for good. I never, you're not supposed to harm anybody. If you harm anybody, it comes back to you 3 times. But the thing is, they don't have a standard for this, because I have asked them, what is your standard for what is harm? How do you determine harm? And they don't have a standard for it. So you can say, I believe in not doing harm, but if you don't have a standard for it, it doesn't really mean anything. It just means you're determining what's harmful and what isn't. And so that goes back to just a very subjective, relative type standard.
Very good, thank you. I have one more, and then we'll start looking at some of the questions here.
Okay.
You mentioned briefly that that you notice some of these ideas within the church are not distinctly Christian, and that actually sort of bear the mark of the things we're talking about tonight.
Yes, yes. Unfortunately, there's one big area, and I do get a lot of pushback to this, but I really know what I'm talking about when I say this. Alternative healing. And by alternative healing, I don't mean drinking a cup of chamomile tea or something like that. I'm talking about actual practices that are not medically validated and not scientifically validated, used to diagnose or to treat illness. And so when you have these kind of things out there, when you look at them, they're almost always based on spiritual beliefs. A lot of them have come from Taoism, like acupuncture, for example, based on belief in this energy chi flowing through the invisible channels in your body called meridians. And it's really a religious belief. It's not a medical belief, and it hasn't been validated. In fact, I think they gave up on trying to validate it because they couldn't. That's just one example. Reflexology is another one. Homeopathy is another one. Homeopathy is based on something called vitalism. And vitalism is this belief that started, I think, in the 1800s or maybe the late 18th century. It's a belief in this vital force flowing through plants, and it's a healing force. And you can actually capture this force from the plants, and you can use it to heal. But the way they do it is they believe that the more you dilute it, the more powerful it is. I mean, this is completely anti-logical, but you dilute it, but when you shake the original substance in liquid, by shaking it, you're releasing the energy into the liquid of the plant or whatever it is. And supposedly doing that strengthens it because the liquid remembers the energy. So it's based on a water memory, and shaking it to make it more powerful. By the time you get the actual product, the original substance is so diluted that there's almost nothing in there. And so actually you might as well take a sugar pill. And yet homeopathy has been practiced in a lot of countries like the UK, almost as a mainstream thing for a long time. I think recently Australia, the Medical Association or the health organization there denounced it and said that they no longer supported it. I can't remember the details, but it was something along those lines. So that's really an occult, that's occult thinking, to think that this energy can go into the liquid. And there's a lot of other healing methods. Of course, energy healing is very occultic, where you think you're transmitting this energy, or you may think that you are, by putting your hands on someone or holding them above somebody, that you're somehow getting rid of whatever's causing the illness. And so they'll actually take their hands away and shake their hands like that. So that's done in a lot of these energy healing methods. And this energy is really a strong component in both the New Age and the occult. This is an energy that has different names. In India, it's prana. In China and Japan and Korea, it's chi or ki. It's called mana in the South Pacific. It's called life force or vital energy in the United States, and maybe in England, life force is another word, or universal energy or healing energy. So it can have different names. And whenever you're dealing with that, something that is unquantifiable, something that you can't, for example, electricity is an energy, but it's a physical energy we can measure and control. Otherwise, we wouldn't have anything electrical working. These are unseen energies that are not measurable and controlled, but the claims are made for them. Or machines, are these machines that supposedly diagnose illnesses. The Rife machine is one of the most popular, and there are a lot of spin-offs. And this is all based on reading your energy patterns in your body, etc. All of these things are becoming very popular in the church. I have watched this alternative healing wave flow through the church since the late 90s, to the point that it's almost become mainstream for some Christians. They almost see it as the way to go. And this is because the New Age and the occult are very anti-science. They're very anti-science, which is ironic because they like to try to claim they're scientific. It's completely contradictory. They like to try to prove they're scientific. So they will, especially the New Age, will use scientific words. Like if you go to a New Age healing website, they may use a lot of words that are scientific, but they're just using them to promote their spiritual idea. And it's funny because they're trying to use science to appear legitimate, and at the same time, they're very anti-science, extremely anti-science. They're against objective data. That's not how they decide things are workable. So the alternative healing, another wave in the church has been the contemplative spirituality. And this has come from different areas, but the problem with this, and this is something I've been tracking for a number of years too, since the 90s, is that this contemplative spirituality tends to be very subjective and experience oriented. And it's not based on objective teachings of the Bible. They will use the Bible and quote the Bible, but it's never used properly. I've never seen them quote the Bible in context. And I've looked at a lot of these teachings over the years. I have a lot of articles on my website on it. And what this does, I think, is when you start doing some of these practices, you have these experiences as a Christian. If you're a Christian, you'll have this experience. You think it's spiritual. You think it's brought you closer to God. And so you keep doing it. And what this leads to, it leads to not seeing the Bible as that important anymore. Or the Bible's just used, in a way in conjunction with these experiences. So you reject studying the Bible and in a regular study way where you're using your mind and you're looking things up and analyzing and reading. That becomes kind of boring or dry compared to these experiences, because we can become addicted to experiences. And actually, that's what happens in the New Age. People are addicted to experiences. Well, Christians can become addicted too. And when you get addicted to these experiences, they undermine your time that you would spend with the Bible or in regular prayer, or maybe even, going to a class or something, a Bible study. So it takes you away from valid biblical study and practice. And it takes you away, and it undermines all that and makes it seem maybe less exciting. And I actually notice on a lot of websites that promote these contemplative things, they say, well, it's just really, Bible study is good, but, it's very dry. And you're just in your head all the time. And we want to get you in your heart. So they'll make this false dichotomy between the head and the heart, which is not biblical. And then that draws you in, it draws you in like, yeah, that sounds good. I want to get more into my heart and out of my head. And that's actually just going towards experiences. And so it's very seductive. This is very seductive, but there are a lot of New Age elements to it, because recently in investigating the contemplative spirituality, I've discovered a lot of it's connected to panentheism and perennialism. And panentheism is the view that God is in creation and creation is in God. And I have found contemplative teachings basically to be panentheistic. Panentheism is completely incompatible with the Bible and with Christian thinking. And the other one, perennialism, a lot of perennialists push this. Perennialism is the view that all religions share one core truth. And so all religions are a path to the truth. And what unites them is mysticism. So they promote mystical practices, and they promote these contemplative practices, Richard Rohr being one of the main people. And he even says you do contemplative practices to unlearn. He even says that. So you unlearn. You have to, in other words, he thinks you're conditioned to think a certain way, which he sees as wrong. By doing contemplative practices, you unlearn all that so that you can learn what he considers to be the truth. So it's actually a method that will alter your thinking. It will alter your worldview to do these practices. I don't know. I gave maybe a too long of an answer, but those are two areas that I see. No, there are others, but
I think, like you say, it's subversive. Sometimes it's very subtle, and people
yes
realize what the long-term consequences are. All right, so I'm gonna move to some of these messages here. We have a question. What about numerology from a biblical perspective?
Oh, okay. All right. Let me get that one. That's a good one. Yes, there is a big misunderstanding on that. Numerology, basically, the definition of that is to see a meaning in numbers where there is no given meaning. So, a numerologist in the occult or the New Age would say, okay, you're born on this date, and when you add those numbers up and you cast out 9, which is how you do it, you end up with a 4. So your life path is a 4. And that means this. So you're giving a meaning, and it's not based on anything objective or valid. It's the way it develops those ideas. So really, biblical numerology is an oxymoron. I think I know what the person is thinking about, because I've had to deal with this before. There's a lot of repetition of certain numbers in the Bible. There's 7, there's 12, there's a lot of 12 tribes, 12 apostles. Um, 3 days is another one. There's also, and I said 7 already, 40 is another number. 40 years in the wilderness. Jesus was in the wilderness 40 days. The thing is, these only have a meaning in context. Okay, for example, Jesus being in the wilderness 40 days was to replicate the 40 years that Israel was in the wilderness. They failed. They didn't obey God the way they should have. And of course, a lot of them ended up not being able to go to the promised land because of that. Jesus was in the wilderness 40 days and he did not fail. He did not succumb to temptation. So he went through these tests, but he succeeded where Israel failed. So that 40 doesn't really mean anything there, except that it shows the correlation with the 40 years in the wilderness with Moses. Other things the Bible doesn't tell us. The Bible doesn't tell us why there are 12 tribes or why there are 12 apostles. And I think trying to give a meaning to that is just a waste of time. You know, it doesn't lead to anything because God, unless God tells us, we shouldn't try to make anything of it. Now, the other side of this numerology issue is something called gematria. Gematria, and actually, I was told as a new Christian that the Hebrews, the people who wrote the Old Testament in Hebrew, at that time, that each letter corresponded to a number. And so you could go back and take the Hebrew and look at the numbers and you could add them up and you would get all these meanings. And a lot of people really believe this is true, but actually gematria comes from the Kabbalah. And the Kabbalah is not ancient. It was started around the 12th or 13th century. What happened is that the first people to come up with the Kabbalah teachings claimed that they had discovered ancient writings. They claimed that they had uncovered this ancient manuscript. And so what they were writing that was part of the Kabbalah was really this ancient manuscript that goes way, way back. But there is absolutely zero evidence for that. It doesn't go back. It's dated to the time these people started writing the Kabbalah, which is like the 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th, maybe the 13th century to the 16th century. That's when the teachings of the Kabbalah developed. I do have a published article on the Kabbalah in the Christian Research Journal, and also I have an article on my website on it. That's where gematria comes from. So it's not biblical at all. It's extra biblical, and not only that, it's part of a what I would call a Gnostic occult worldview of the Kabbalah. Mm-hmm. So biblical numerology, oxymoron.
Okay, good. Well, thank you. Let me see here. Oh, they're coming in thick and fast. Let me say that we will have Marcia's website, like I said, at the bottom here in the comments section. So if you want to contact her, you can contact her through the website, and she's also on Facebook if you want to ask her specific questions. So I've had there are two similar questions, basically asking on how we share the gospel with people in the New Age or astrology. So let's try and keep it short. You don't have a sort of a long-term relationship. You interact with somebody for just a few minutes. How can you put that pebble in the shoe to plant the seed? Or what sort of pointed questions can you ask?
Well, I always like to ask the person either who they think God is or who they think Jesus is. Now, I would want to know a little bit more about him to be able to give advice on what to ask. But generally speaking, I would, if they're talking about God or something, or say they have spiritual beliefs, I would want to ask them, do you believe in God? Who do you think God is? And do you believe in Jesus? Who do you think Jesus is? Because the answer to those questions will show you a lot about what they believe. And until you know what they believe, you can't really say anything to them. You really have to know a little bit about what they believe. So depending on how long this conversation goes with them, I would try to get them to say, and then you can always say, well, why do you believe that? Or what makes you think that that's true? And that also gives you more information about them. Why do you think that's true? Another question to ask is, have you had what is your background? What is your spiritual background? I think that's a very good question, because a lot of people will say, well, I was a Christian, or I was raised going to church. And then I always like to say, okay, I'd like to find out what church, because sometimes they say that and they're really talking about something like Jehovah's Witnesses or something, which is a cult and is not really Christianity. So I like to know what church. So they might say, oh, it's Methodist or something. then I always want to say, well, what made you reject it? So you've rejected that. Now you're believing this. What made you reject that? Why do you think that Christianity isn't true? And you have to ask these kind of open-ended questions. There's no formula, for just witnessing and getting them to see the truth. You have to ask these open-ended questions and listen to them. And then hopefully, if you're having a back and forth conversation, you can share the gospel. You can say, well, Jesus said that he came to die at the hands of men and suffer and would rise again, because this is what he started telling his disciples on his way to Jerusalem. And he actually had said it a few times before, but it was a little more, not as obvious what he was saying. They realized what he was saying. So, you could say Jesus even said this is what he was going to do. Because if they say something like, well, Jesus came to show us love, I also ask, why do you think Jesus came? Well, he came to show us love. Well, yes, he did. He came to show us God's love, but he also said he came to suffer at the hands of men and die and rise again. Why do you think he said that? So there's a lot of ways you can kind of get that in there, but you need to let the other person say some things first.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good, thank you. That's helpful. Sure, yes. Many to choose from. I apologize in advance if we don't get through it, but Marcia, if it's okay with you, we'll keep going. Here's one.
Oh, yes.
Could you please discuss the Enneagram in light of what it is and its origins? Could it be redeemable for Christians as a personality typology?
Okay, that's a great question, because my other book is on the Enneagram. So just to let people know, it's called Richard Rohr and the Enneagram Secret. It's by myself and two other people, Don and Joy Vino, Veinot, and then Marcia Montenegro. So you can find that on Amazon and a lot of different places. I don't know about where you are, how available it is, but it's also an ebook and on Kindle. Yeah, the Enneagram is something actually I started warning about it. My first article on it was in 2011, when most Christians had no idea what it was. And that's because at that time it was in what is called the Progressive Church. And it had been introduced mainly through Richard Rohr, who's very much a hero of the progressives. And so they latched on to his Enneagram book. Eventually then InterVarsity Press, which is seen as a Christian publisher, published a book, The Road Back to You. And then Zondervan published a book the following year, The Sacred Enneagram by Chris Hurwitz. And then it got into the church that way. And the thing is, nobody investigated this. They took the word of these authors of these books who claimed it was ancient. It perhaps had Christian origins. Sometimes they said, we don't really know where it's from, but we think, it was started by so-and-so in the 4th century. The thing is, none of this is true. The Enneagram actually began as a teaching in the 20th century, really only a little over 100 years ago, by a man named George Gurdjieff, who was he was kind of a mystic spiritual teacher type. And he claimed to have traveled and gotten all these teachings from all these wise people. And then he had followers, and he was teaching things to these followers. Now, he did not write about the Enneagram, but that was one of his teachings, because he believed the Enneagram, which, in case people don't know what it is, it's a geometric figure that has 9 points, 9 sides and 9 points. And he thought that the Enneagram contained all the secrets and all the laws of the universe. So he felt you could put anything into the Enneagram. He did not teach it as having anything to do with a personality or with an individual. It supposedly had these cosmic teachings in it. And he put a musical scale on it. He said there was a law of 3 and a law of 7, and he kind of played with it mathematically. Okay, his follower, Uspensky, then wrote books about Gurdjieff's teachings, including about the Enneagram. And so that teaching carried on through followers of Gurdjieff and Uspensky, who both died in the late 1940s. And so there, at that point, it's a secret teaching that these groups or occult groups have. Then in the 1960s, I'm sorry, this man named Oscar Ichazo, who was Bolivian, came across the Enneagram. We don't know, there are different stories on how he got it. The main story is that he came across some followers of Gurdjieff's teachings, and that's how he learned about the Enneagram. He incorporated the Enneagram in his teachings at a school he had in Arica, Chile. And it was a secretive school, and he really taught occult practices is what he did. And he was also into using these psychedelic drugs to go on have spiritual experiences. He also claimed to have spirit contact with 2 spirits, one called Metatron, which is actually from the Kabbalah, and he supposedly studied the Kabbalah, and another one called the Green Ketub, which I think comes from some kind of mystical Sufi or Islamic teaching. I'm not as sure about that one, but I think it's connected to Sufism. And he claimed that his group was guided by an interior master, a spirit being who was guiding them. So he was into spirit contact. And he taught the Enneagram, and he added the idea that the Enneagram shows how you cover up your pure essence, because he taught we all are born with a pure, unsullied essence. We're pure at the heart of who we are, we're pure. But we cover it up as we have experiences and people tell us things and teach us certain things and we believe certain things, we start putting false ideas on top of this pure essence. And his idea was you use the Enneagram to find which area you have gravitated to that's false about yourself. And you get at that and work through it, and then you can uncover your pure essence. And so that's how he used it. It still wasn't really a personality tool. He had a student named Claudio Naranjo, who was a Chilean psychiatrist, who was his main area of practice was to use psychedelic drugs and study its effect on people. So he's very compatible with Ichazo. And Naranjo was a spiritual seeker at this point, and he was very interested in Ichazo's teachings. So he learned the Enneagram from Ichazo. And then Claudio Naranjo went to Esalen in California. Esalen was a very edgy place in the 60s in Big Sur, California. It had attracted a lot of psychologists who were into experimental psychology. A lot of these things we've heard about, like the primal scream was something in Gestalt therapy that started there. Using drugs and using drugs for spiritual trips was happening at Esalen. And there was just a whole group of people with all kinds of kind of edgy spiritual type teachings there at the time. It was sort of a hothouse. And Claudio Naranjo went there and started teaching his version of the Enneagram there. Now, Claudio Naranjo claims, and he's the one who came up with the 9 types that are taught today. He claims that he got the information for the 9 types via automatic writing. Automatic writing is a form of channeling spirit contact. So you can channel a spirit speaking through you, which is the more common way. Well, maybe not the more common way, but one way. Or you can channel through writing. And the spirit supposedly is controlling your hand in writing. I don't know which way he said automatic writing. So he claimed it was through writing. He claims this on 2 videos on YouTube. And he said this is how he got the information. That was most of the information came through automatic writing, and he admits it. So this did not come from psychological studies. It didn't come from, even a psychologist who was an expert on personality or anything like that. It comes from the psychiatrist who's into the New Age and the occult and takes drugs for spiritual trips and does spirit contact, and gets it from automatic writing. So it has absolutely zero validity. And actually, if you look hard enough, you can find psychologists who say it doesn't pass the criteria for a personality test. It doesn't. It's actually contradictory in a lot of its teachings about the types. I just read an article on that the other day. So there is zero validity to it. So if you think you're a 4 or you think you're a 7, you're not. You're not those things at all. You may have some of those traits that are described, but don't put yourself in a category there, because it's the same as the zodiac in astrology. It operates the same way. People think they fit their zodiac sign, and people think if they go to an astrologer, they think when the astrologer's talking, they're like, wow, that's so true about me. And this is because we're very good at deceiving ourselves. We latch on to things we hear that sound true. And so we think, oh, yeah, that's true. We tend to ignore the things we don't like or we don't think are true about ourselves. And so we can put ourselves in a category artificially. And then you start filtering everything through that category. So if you think you're an Aries with, the moon in Sagittarius, and you're Pisces rising or something, you start thinking, yeah, I'm like that because that's my Sagittarius moon. That's why I reacted that way. Okay, this is how you think in astrology. I see the same thing with the Enneagram. Well, I'm a 4, but that was my 3 wing. The wings have also shown to be totally invalid. And you know where the wings came from? They were developed in the New Age, because after Claudio Naranjo was doing his teaching at Esalen, it went in 2 directions. There was a Jesuit priest there named Bob Oakes. I don't know what he was doing there, but he was there. And he took the teaching to a seminary in Chicago and taught it to some Jesuit or some priests there. I don't know if they were all Jesuits, because Richard Rohr was one of them, and he's not a Jesuit. And then it got into the New Age as well around the same time. And Helen Palmer, who at the time was a psychic, started teaching it and wrote a book about it and made it very popular in the New Age. Like a lot of New Agers jumped on board because it's a perfect New Age tool, because it has no standard, it has no model, it has no absolutes in it. You can make it anything you want. And the New Age is really good at that. And that's where it developed the wings and most of the teachings. Now, the New Agers used it to uncover the true self. And actually, that's how Richard Rohr teaches it, although he means something a little different than the New Agers. However, he has actually endorsed Helen Palmer as an Enneagram teacher. And she doesn't even claim to be a Christian, but he's endorsed her. So that's how the Enneagram came to be. And I want to make one more point. The first book, The Road Back to You, by Suzanne Stabile and Ian Cron. Suzanne Stabile was discipled or mentored, if is a better word, by Richard Rohr. She and her husband were mentored for years by Richard Rohr. So she has the beliefs of Richard Rohr, and Richard Rohr has heretical beliefs. And then the second book by Chris Horowitz also was mentored by Richard Rohr. So what you're getting in those books is non-Christian theology, and I've looked at them. They are not Christian books. They are not Christian. In fact, the first chapter of The Road Back to You is so obviously not only not Christian, it's anti-Christian, that it really shows the state of the church, that this book is used in study groups, used in women's studies, endorsed by pastors. Same with the Sacred Enneagram. All the books repeat the same kind of falseness and warped theology. So I could go on and on, of course, because I've done whole programs on it. So, but I'm glad that question was asked. So, and I have articles on my website on the Enneagram. So,
thank you. Yes, and of course, with modern day social media or just in general, it's everywhere. So, yeah. We appreciate that. Gosh, it's really hard to choose. Well, since you just mentioned the word there, I'm gonna. Cardinal here is stirring the hornet's nest, and of course, it's the token 2 females tonight doing the interview as well. Why is the paranormal, the New Age, astrology, all of these things you're talking about, why does it seem that women especially, and especially sort of younger women, or it's usually, you know, in a sort of younger age in their lives, that they are so very much attracted to it? Have you come up with an answer for that?
Why women seem to be more attracted to it?
Attracted to it, yes.
Yeah, I can only kind of speculate. I don't know for sure, but I think women are, first of all, are more relationship oriented. And I'm not trying to, you know, stereotype women here, but I just think that's the way God made us. I think we are more relationship oriented. We tend to be more sensitive to relationships. I think we tend to need relationships more than men, at least on an emotional level. So I think these kind of practices here are having to do with understanding yourself and understanding other people, or a lot of them are. And so women gravitate to that because it's something you can use in relationships, or something you can use to understand. You think you can use it to understand your husband or your children or whatever. So I think that's part of it. I think women are just a little more, they're just a little more open to something that appeals to you personally that you can use in a relationship. But I have to tell you that I had probably, as far as my clients went, my astrology clients, now they weren't practicing astrology, most of them, but they were it was pretty much 50-50 men and women as far as people who came. Maybe slightly more women, but there was still a large number of men. And there are men, you know, a lot of my teachers at this place where I took astrology and psychic development were men. Maybe people notice women being in it more. I don't know. Or maybe women talk about it more. I don't really know if the percentages are true, but that's my answer on that.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, one here. I use projection therapy for a neuropathic pain condition, but a few of my friends are concerned that it has roots in New Age. Any comments on projection
I'm not
therapy?
sure what projection therapy is.
So what would you say then are some pointers? What to look out for? What would mark it?
Yeah, I don't know if by projection this person means mental, or do they mean a mental projection, like thinking of a certain thing in their mind in order to deal with, he said, certain what do you say, neurological conditions?
Neuropathic pain.
Neuropathic pain. I think that if you're just using something to calm yourself and you realize it's not real, it's okay. You know, I mean, I don't know what he's using, but if you're, you know, if you're like at the dentist, let's say, and you're kind of afraid and they're working on your teeth, I don't think it's wrong. Like if you want to picture yourself at the beach and that helps you relax, you know, that's just using your imagination. There's nothing wrong with using imagination. But if you're projecting something and you're trying to make it real, that's different. Or I don't know if he even means astral projection, out of the body projection, although he didn't say that. So I don't want to assume that, of course, would be occultic and would be dangerous. I actually don't think you can go out of your body. I had a lot of out of body experiences. I had a lot of them. And they're very real. You feel like you're out of your body. You can see your body on the bed or whatever. I really think it's a delusion. It's a demonic delusion. But I think it's dangerous for many reasons because it puts you in contact with fallen angels. I don't know if he means that. I'm going to have to look that up since he raised that issue. I'm sorry, I can't say too much more because I'm not sure what it is.
Okay, and I might find out some more details, and
yeah,
it can be a more personal conversation. Now, in what you've just said there, I think we can bind together a few of these questions here. Maybe some of the skeptics throwing out, well, you know, why does the astrologer or the Wiccan never win the lottery or heal people in hospitals? So on the one end of the spectrum, you know, this is just complete hoax. There's nothing true in it. It's all false. It's all made up. It's real, all really sort of prying on people's superstitions. And then on the other end, what you just mentioned, you know, that surely then it's not dangerous. What about the other end of the spectrum? Because we aren't rationalists, materialists. We do believe in the supernatural. We do
Yes, yes.
confirm life or disembodied spirits, if you want to call it that. So what do you see as the distinctions? And maybe I know it might be hard to put numbers to it, but to what extent is what we see really just hoax, for lack of a better word, and is there real danger?
Okay, yes. Now, let me answer the first part of that, was why do psychics or Wiccans never win the lottery or something? And the answer that they would give would be, first of all, a lot of them say they can't use their powers for themselves. They can only use them for others. That's one answer I heard a lot from psychics. The other is they never claim to be 100% correct. Mm-hmm. So they would think, well, I could be wrong. But I think the main answer would be they can't use their powers for themselves. And so that would be the answer to that. Now, as far as the hoax versus the real and the dangers, that's really good to point out here. There are people who do this for a living, who may be an astrologer or a psychic. Usually they're like have a storefront sign, or they advertise in some way. And they make it sound like they can really give you all the answers. Do you have love problems? Do you have money problems? Come see me. I will tell you what to do. And these people are mostly con artists. They're very good at reading people. So as soon as if you're actually seeing them in person, they're good at sizing you up. They can guess from your age and maybe how you're dressed and different things, where you are in society, where you are in life. And because they're good at reading people, they can guess a lot of things about you that are true and hit on them. They just have certain skills in that area, and they're basically con artists. Then there's the other side of the people who do these things in a spiritual way, or in a way where they really believe in it and they really think it's good. They think they're helping people, like what I did. I really thought I was helping people. I had a spirituality that went along with my astrology, and I wanted to help people. This is what I want. One reason I wanted to do astrology is I wanted to help people, and I thought I was helping people. And that actually is much more dangerous than the con artist. With the con artist, you're likely to lose money. With the spiritual people doing this stuff, you're likely to get in trouble spiritually. So it's really more dangerous, because these people who do these things, all of the psychics, the tarot card readers, the astrologers, all those people, the mediums who claim to talk to the dead, all of them have spirit guides, which is something that, I mentioned at the very beginning with my story, how I encountered my spiritual master. That was my spirit guide. And I actually had more than one. And I always felt my spirit guide was helping me when I was doing my astrology reading. I thought a lot of it was me. And also I felt I had been an astrologer in past lives. So I felt that I was drawing on this experience from previous lives and my own knowledge, and then the spirit guide helping me, especially when I would suddenly see something in the chart I hadn't seen before. Or I would get a picture in my head and I would say something to the client and they would say, yeah, that's true. It really wasn't something I got in the chart. It was something put in my head. And now I still think that it was my spirit guide who did that. But who are the spirit guides? They're fallen angels. They are the angels who rebelled against God and went with Satan. We know angels are around. The Bible talks about angels. We know they exist. And there are angels who serve God, and there are angels who serve Satan. And those are the angels that help these people. And I can tell you, from having been an astrologer and known astrologers and having friends who were psychics and mediums, all of them had spirit guides. I mean, we even talked about our spirit guides sometimes, not with our clients, but with each other. It's very, very real. And so what you're doing is, when you go to these people who really believe in it, you are getting advice, at least in part, from some fallen angel. So none of that is going to be beneficial to you at all. In the immediate thing, something good might happen, but there's going to come at a cost.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to point out that these spirit guides are a real thing, and that people who do these things seriously are being guided by fallen angels. So that is a danger right there. Not to mention that if you start believing these things, if you aren't a Christian, it will take you away from Christ for sure, like it did for me. If you are a Christian, it's going to in some way undermine your faith and definitely undermine your relationship with the Lord, because you're actually disobeying God by going to these people. Even if it's a con artist, you're disobeying God, whether it's the con artist or the real practitioner. So there's always a danger.
Thank you. We are almost out of time, but I want to ask one more question here from our friend Rogers. He says, and you alluded to this a little when you talked about your own story. He asks, how can the church help people recovering from the occult or New Age movement? How could the church have made it easier for you, or how do we reach out to these people, and what sort of discipleship is necessary, maybe?
Yes, definitely. I think it's good to let the person talk about their experiences, because usually that's what I wanted to do. I really wanted someone to talk to, and I didn't find somebody initially. I did finally, after a few months, run across a married couple who had been in the New Age and also had been in Scientology, actually. And we completely, we had a rapport, instant rapport, and I could talk to them about my past and what happened. And because other people didn't seem to want to talk to me about it. I think because maybe they were weirded out or something. When I said I used to be an astrologer, sometimes they would just look at me and not say anything, which was very, because then it's like I just told them I have a disease, kind of like, okay, get away from me. I had very strange reactions from some people. Not always, but some people. So I think don't be shocked by somebody saying, well, I was into witchcraft, or I was a Wiccan, and then God saved me. Say, oh, I'd love to hear your story, and then somebody, a man for a man and a woman for a woman coming out of these, to disciple that person, to help them get grounded in scripture, to learn how to interpret God's word correctly, to understand how to use God's word and how to grow as a Christian. I mean, and this, of course, is a long process, but it has to start somewhere. And people who are coming out of these beliefs, especially if they've been in them a long time, this is all new territory for them. And, that's how I felt. I didn't know anything. I mean, I knew nothing. And I knew the basics. I knew Jesus Christ was a savior. He died for my sins. I believed in the Trinity. I didn't understand it, but I believed in it. And I believed the Bible was God's word. And I had those basics down, but I didn't even know how to pray. So I think being open to hearing their story, let them talk. Don't be shocked by anything they say. They may need to share things. Some of them may not want to share things initially, but some people do. They want someone to hear what they went through. And maybe if there's somebody else that who went through that and became a Christian, maybe connect them together. I think the main thing is to be there for them, to listen to them, and to get them into some kind of program to learn and study the Bible, and pray for them. I think it would be good also, if this is happening in a church, find a few people who are willing to pray for this person. That would be very important, because Satan likes to attack new believers, and coming out of the occult and the New Age, that to him is an easy target. And they can be, and by attack, I don't mean something sensational. What I'm thinking of is, for example, and this actually happened to me, coming across somebody in a cult trying to recruit me.
Okay.
And that's actually very common. So, false teachings trying to lure that new believer away. So that's one thing. So the person needs to be prayed for.
Well, thank you so much. And we commit, Marcia, to pray for you and your ministry. Thank you so much. taking the time to share with us. And I'll just again take the liberty to encourage people. I know there were some more questions here tonight, some that had more of a sort of a personal inclination to them. If you want to contact Marcia before the session started, she assured me that she'd be willing to take some of those questions via both Facebook and then her website. So thank you so much. And we might just be back if there's enough of a need and people asking, we might, since we can have you online for now.
Yes, that would be great. I would be happy to come back. That would be fine. We could do just a question and answer thing, maybe. Maybe that would, and I do want people to know, if they go to Facebook, go to my ministry page, Christian Answers for the New Age, and they can message me there. They can message me by my name too, but I just want them to know about my ministry page, and you can like and follow that. And I put up information there all the time. Okay. Thank you, Nell.
So much. And thank you to our audience tonight for being with us. We appreciate your time, and we hope that it's been beneficial. Join us again on Monday night. Actually, we have an extra live stream this week. We will be interviewing Dr. Michael Brown, who is a Messianic Jew, a believer in Jesus, and he'll be talking to us a little bit about Old Testament prophecy and the ways in which Jesus fulfilled those, and questions concerning some of those passages that the New Testament authors quote and so on. So we look forward to having some time with Dr. Brown. Please join us for that. Well, thank you for being with us tonight, and God bless.
So is it over? Yeah.
I think so. Andre hasn't said anything. Andre, are we offline? I hope so. I don't know. Is he there?
Is he there? Just send a message.
Send him a message quickly. He's on your phone.
Oh gosh, sorry.
There he is. We're off.
Hello?
We're offline, right? Oh, so all that was on there when we were asking if we were offline.